Mr. Speaker.
I call Kelvin Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to address three particular issues related to this bill, Mr. Speaker. First of all, the Labour Party doesn't support it. Secondly, the first issue that I'd like to address is the makeup of the Education Council. And Chris Hipkins has already alluded to the fact that the Minister is going to be the person who appoints the members of the Council. And as he has said, there are no other careers or places of work where the people who work in the sector are not going to be elected to represent their sector. And Mr. Speaker, it just goes to show that the voice of teachers is not being listened to. As a former teacher, as a former principal, I'd like to think that the people that were representing me on any council were people that we had put there. At least the majority of them, Mr. Speaker. I see in the first draft of the bill there was going to be a maximum of 5 teachers put onto the council. However, there was no minimum. So what we're saying is that there could have been the case where absolutely no teachers were a part of that council, and I know that teachers would find that abhorrent. Mr. Speaker, the second point I'd like to make is around the appraisal audits. I see that 10% of appraisals for re-registration are going to be audited, and I think what this does is it undermines or underestimates the complexity of teaching, the complexity, the dynamic nature of being a teacher. So the Educans is going to be responsible for auditing 10% of appraisals. What I would like to know then is what are the criteria that those appraisals are going to be subjected to, because we've got 2,000 schools or thereabouts in New Zealand, and every one of those schools does their appraisals according to their own needs, and so there isn't a standard format for appraisal, and yet the council is going to come along and audit them and say, well, this school over here, your appraisal system is good, the school over here, your appraisal system isn't good, but based on whose criteria and who, what suits the council. Nobody knows, so we need to actually have some criteria, but that's problematic in itself, Mr. Speaker, because then if we have criteria for appraisal, we're just absolutely going to narrow down appraisal and the curriculum and education to what the council actually thinks is important for education. And that, Mr. Speaker, is unacceptable, because education and teaching is such a dynamic, such dynamic work. When we look at the breakdown of the curriculum, Mr. Speaker, at least when I was still teaching some 7 years ago, there were 7 curriculum areas. Each of those curriculum areas was broken down into strands. Each of those curriculum areas was broken down into levels. There are so many aspects of the curriculum that a teacher could be appraised upon. And so what's important to the Education Council, Mr. Speaker? Is what's important to the communities of those schools? I'm not sure, because we don't know what the criteria are, but if we do have criteria, then we narrow down the way teachers are going to teach and be appraised, and that's not good for education. But if we do focus the appraisals solely on the curriculum, then that absolutely ignores the rest of the work that teachers do. For example, are they going to be appraised on the extracurricular work that teachers do? The sports teams they coach, the music groups they coach, running a school fair or having a school drama or play, all the duties they do, the camps they run. A teacher's going to be given credit for the broad nature of the work they do, or are their appraisals going to be audited basically on a very, very narrow set of criteria? It is really important, Mr. Speaker, that teachers are recognised and valued for the dynamic nature of the work they do. It is such a relentless job, and they're not getting credit for what they do in the schools on a daily basis for all the children in our communities. There was some count up of all the different objectives throughout the curriculum, Mr. Speaker, and there's thousands of specific objectives. Are teachers going to be appraised on each of those? Which ones are most important? If we take the strand of maths, I think there's, the subject of maths, there's 5 strands, I think, by memory. So a teacher could be appraised on how well they teach number. So they may get a whole heap of children over the national standard in number, but they don't in measurement for whatever reason. Does that mean they're a good teacher in maths and or a bad teacher? Because they're achieving, the students are achieving in one strand but not in the other. So in maths alone, there's number, there's measurement, there's geometry, there's statistics, there's algebra. How do we determine how good a teacher is, or whether they deserve any increments in their pay if we have some sort of Educans imposed appraisal system? And then we have English. There's written, there's written language, oral language. There's so many ways. So a teacher could be teaching reading really, really well, but not doing so well in written language. How is Educans going to say that the school over here that's doing really well in reading, but not doing, or the teachers that are doing really well in reading, but not so well in writing, deserve their appraisals, or the audit? They pass the audit for their appraisals. It's just such a fraught concept. I just don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to be fair on teachers, because, as I say, it is such a dynamic job, and I think that this Parliament needs to recognise, needs to really understand just the relentless nature of teaching, the paperwork, the number of objectives, the number of curriculum levels. We had curriculum levels, Mr. Speaker, and then over the top came national standards. And where does that leave the curriculum levels that we used to assess children against, and which could make up part of appraisals? Now national standards have turned up and been imposed on schools, and again, it just makes this whole auditing of appraisals fraught. And I'm only talking about the primary sector. I don't know, I was never a secondary teacher, Mr. Speaker, so I don't know how much more complicated it is for secondary teachers. And I also wonder, then, are the same standards for appraisal going to be imposed on secondary schools as they are on primary schools, Mr. Speaker? I have real concerns about that part of the bill in particular. And another part of the bill, Mr. Speaker, that I have concerns about, and it goes specifically to Clause 38, new Section 353, where it says this is referring to registration of teachers. The Education Council must register an applicant under Section 352 if satisfied that the applicant, and then we go down to E2, has, in accordance with the provisions of any relevant enactment, been granted an exemption by the Chief Executive in respect of every conviction for a specified offence listed in Schedule 21. So there's a list of offences in Schedule 21 where a person can apply to be a teacher and get exemption even if they have committed one of these offences, these specified offences, Mr. Speaker. And these offences, A is sexual violation, attempted sexual violation, sexual conduct. Why on earth would we try and grant any exemption for anybody who's guilty of any of these offences, Mr. Speaker? It starts at A and goes down to Z, so there's 26 pretty abhorrent types of offences, and yet we're allowing the possibility of somebody who's been convicted of one of these offences of actually becoming a teacher. And I think that part of the bill, Mr. Speaker, is really quite ridiculous. Why would we want to employ anybody that's guilty of any serious sexual type crime, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, Labour opposes this bill. I've got those concerns around the makeup of the Educans Council, around the appraisal, and also around that section that I've just spoken about, around the list of offences that teachers could get exemptions from. We don't, the Labor doesn't support this bill, Mr Speaker. Kia ora.
Kia ora. The Honourable Stephen Joyce.